faces and told me that you were not true and told me they would redistribute you. Rolled your eyes to a goodwill. They thank you till they had their fill, and they sold your teeth at a flea market, showed your skin at a Target, and made the earth from your bones, and they put your brains into phones, and they turned you into quite a prophet, and hid the rest in my closet.
Welcome gamers, my name is Joel Gaming. Today we're going to take a dive into a game surrounded with mystery, Psychopomp Gold. Now, for all the veterans of this channel, you may remember one of my first videos being on Psychopomp. If you'd like to check it out, click here. However, today we're going to be taking a more nuanced look at the game. In addition to gameplay, we're going to take a look at what makes this game special, including our paranoid main character, her role in the creation of space, and much more. If you find your interest piqued, strap on your mind-reading helmets, and together let's uncover the secrets of the universe and what the government doesn't want you to know. Also warning, this video does contain spoilers. To give a brief overview of gameplay, we start out as Savinash Vishnari, or the Queen of Venus. Don't worry, this will make sense in just a little bit. She's become disillusioned with the lies others have told her, so she's taken it upon herself to create a mind-reading helmet and learn what the world is hidden from her. Because of what is either enlightenment or psychosis, we find ourselves in the hidden labyrinths beneath state-funded institutions, including a sewage system, a public hospital, and a public school. In these catacombs, our job is simple. Use our four senses, sight, touch, feel, or hammer, and navigate monstrosities, both friend and foe, as we search for eggs of the earth, fetal amniotic sacs that contain the genetic information needed to restart the earth. To collect these eggs, we must drop a guillotine on a larval member of anime royalty. Yes, you heard that right. Execute famous figures from history, including Cleopatra, Plato, and Alexander the Great, and crush the giant disembodied head of a factory manager. Once collected, we chuck them into the abyss, and then proceed to the center of the earth. We then use our hands to take this genetic Pillsbury dough and morph it into a small flesh golem before sprouting wings and ascending to the heavens while the credits roll. Like you, I'm also wondering what just happened. Fortunately, this game's mysteries run deep and can help us explain how our Goblin Mode main character is expected to fulfill the role of godhood. In search for answers, we can look to the transient locations in the game to provide some detail. These are kind of like little side areas in the game that give us more context into the mystery surrounding the game. The first of these areas is referred to as a Thrate village? What is that? What is a Thrate? Our questions answered not long after encountering the village's inhabitants. Living underground are these short, stocky-like creatures that resemble either horses or dogs, and they have long, fur-covered faces. These Thrates have bright-colored eyes and seem to vary in age, because we can find some who are much older than others, while in the camp there's also one who is much younger. What's interesting about the Thrates is that they seem to appear at various locations throughout the game, and also are only comprised of a tribe of women. Upon approaching the Three women, they describe their struggles in simply trying to live a peaceful existence. One Three woman laments how their village has been forced underground by humans and expresses disgust at how they're supposed to call Earth home. Another shares that food has been hard to come by, while the youngest of the bunch says that all there is to eat are rats and old hamburgers. It didn't sound like too bad a meal to me, but I digress. As we take a look around the Three village, we can see the female gender symbol on the walls and some of the decorations. Upon closer inspection, we can see two large figures intertwining arms in a DNA-like helix, with a female symbol on the left and a slightly different symbol on the right. According to Wikipedia, these symbols were originally, quote, widely used in Swedish biologist and physician Carl Linnaeus' Martisa plantarum and Mantissa plantarum altera. In these works, Linnaeus describes the symbols that portray XX, XY, or intersex chromosomes as being the symbols for Venus, Mars, or Mercury in that order. With this in mind, it seems that the village has a certain reverence for Venus and Mercury. However, any depiction of Mars is missing from this village, possibly hinting that maybe they don't worship this god, or that this god's role isn't this consequential in the universe of Psychopomp. Exploring the village further, we find a Three woman who says she saw a human get hit by a car, and that everything inside of them spilled out, nothing but dust and clay. What do you mean by that? We also encounter another Thrate woman who expresses her dissatisfaction toward the small Thrate child having to live, quote, under a sickly blue sky. Next to this woman is a giant mural that is hard to decipher. At first glance, it looks like an eye with some eyelashes extended outward, and a figure eight where the pupil should be, and four black circles with red dots adorning the different cardinal directions at each part of the inner eye. I wonder what this could be. Well, while we dwell on that, we can take our leave from the Thrate village and venture into the next transient location. This one doesn't seem to have a name, and instead only contains two large floating blue orbs. At first, it really doesn't seem like there's a whole lot going on here until the two orbs start talking with one another. They check in that they can hear one another before relaying info about the status of the quote, queen and king. Now we know that our playable character Venus has been alluded to being the queen of dragonflies throughout the game. We can see this in different notes, the end sequence that shows her sprouting wings and flying away, and some other content that we'll cover in just a little bit here. With all this in mind, it raises the question of, what about the king? Who is he? As we ponder these questions, orbs continue to talk about how the queen's progress is perfect and the king is asleep, and so not to disrupt him until, quote, everything is ready. The whole time the right orb expresses his boredom, saying that these puppets are boring and that they're not like the real thing. These ones squirm too much and make a mess once they pop? What's he talking about? Then the right orb starts calling him a good boy and calls him the king of all boys and says he'll give him a big nice bone next time he sees him? What is going on here? Okay, so now what you think. The king of all boys actually refers to the dog we meet earlier in the game who seems to be pulling the strings behind this operation. It seems the king of dogs is scheming something that we can't just put our fingers on quite yet. Even so, it's still pretty concerning. Why do they have to scheme so that the king is kept out of the loop? What are their plans for the queen of dragonflies? Are they looking for world domination? Are they trying to use them to their own benefit? So we have a lot of questions at this point. As we ponder these different questions, the two orbs finish their conversation, and one of them expresses their concern about whether this channel is secure for communication. The other one says it doesn't really matter because, quote, nobody listening can do anything. As if this wasn't foreboding enough, we can look upward and see a gangly looking figure looking down at us. Now the cool part about Psychopomp Gold is that this game actually has mod support, and so we can download a free cam, credit to Subaki on Psychopomp's Steam Workshop. We can actually fly closer to this unknown individual and take a closer look. And admittedly, there isn't a whole lot much more to look at than from a distance. Even so, there are a few observations that we can make. For one, we can see that this figure looks clay-like in appearance and has a human shape to it. It has barely visible dark holes where its eyes and mouth should be, and if we look behind it, there actually looks to be what appears to be hair or maybe flesh or something like that. Either way, I'm creeped out, maybe you're creeped out. This whole time this thing's been watching us and I'm crawling in my skin. In an attempt to get away from this unsettling being, we go to the next transient location called Daddy's Bad Place, and already I've got a feeling that this one might be worse than the last. Upon entering this location, all we really see is a small room with walls that are expanding and a TV set in the middle. Interestingly, there's also a cross on the wall and a small replica of what they call a screw pile lighthouse, and I looked it up on Wikipedia, and screw pile lighthouses are those that are, well, screwed into a sandy or muddy sea or river bottom. Even more interesting, this replica actually resembles that of the Thomas Point Shoal Light in the Chesapeake Bay on the east coast of the United States. I tried to dig a little bit deeper and see if there was any more symbolism that we could make connection to, but to be honest, I couldn't really find much outside of that. Maybe this lighthouse represents the light in the dark that our character is looking for. While we ponder these questions, the TV suddenly lights up and announces a public service announcement where it warns citizens of a, quote, large unknown insectoid creature.
Repeat. At 3:45 a.m. today, a state of emergency was declared following the appearance of a large unknown insectoid creature in the Melnitz borough of Central City.
The voice goes on to advise citizens to remain safe and stop any thinking and do not approach the insect even though it appears human in nature. The broadcaster then ends his warning by saying the insect is not real over and over before the message ends.
The insect is not real. The insect is not real. The insect is not real.
Now, although that doesn't really give us a whole lot of context to work with what this person is warning against, we can assume that it refers to Venus toward the end of the game when she sprouts wings and flies upward from the underground labyrinth. Now, whether we were to interpret this literally as her becoming a Mothra-like creature or metaphorically growing wings and gaining knowledge and becoming free from what their government is telling other citizens, I'm not sure. Either way, it's pretty clear that the government's trying to discourage its citizens from free thinking and try to stop this person who might serve as a threat to their oligarchy. Leaving this orange-clad room, we make it to our last transient location, which is called Starting Point, and it gives more support to the idea that the Dragonfly Queen actually has a physical form. At the end of this dark hallway, we find a giant green, almost sarcophagus-like structure that is clearly empty, with whatever was inside of it having escaped. There's also a Threat woman next to it where, after interacting with her, she says that the, quote, queen's chrysalis has hatched and that she fears for her safety as, quote, vermin dogs might lead her astray now that she's hatched from her chrysalis. Now, given that vermin dogs is capitalized, we might assume that it's a proper noun and refers to maybe the king of all dogs is trying to use the Dragonfly Queen's power for his own good or for some nefarious purpose or whatever alliance he's a part of that is looking to cause harm. Well, as we mull over things, we can take our leave, kind of like the other transient locations. There's not a whole lot else in this area, and we can leave and get to the other parts of the game. And to do that, we actually have to go deeper into the subterranean layers of the Earth where we arrive at the next overworld. Taking a look at it, I don't really know what we're looking at, to be honest. Some ideas that could be that this image maybe relates to the picture of like the female body with like vertebrae being visible and like potential outlines of ovaries in the background. This imagery would be consistent with Venus representing femininity or a female figure of power by being the queen. Other ideas could be that maybe this is like a cross-section of a dragonfly where it further highlights how Venus is stepping into a role as the dragonfly queen. Either way, we're given two options, and of these two, let's start with the first level, hard structure. A lot of the focus on this level is actually the idea of what buildings are, as Venus comments on, what is a building? What forms the dirt beneath our feet? And we step into a concrete jungle where all around us there's these giant gray buildings that seemingly never end. I think her confusion is warranted given that we're kind of find ourselves in this labyrinth before entering the elevator and opening up to a new area that is kind of equally as confusing as the first. As the elevator doors open, we're thrust out into the blood-red ruins of a dilapidated city where there's these giant green, translucent moths that are feeding off the remains of the city's buildings. The creepiness continues as we find that we're surrounded by a sea of blood while there's this giant eye in the background that's reflected in the moon and staring back at us, and really this can be a motif that we can find throughout the game as it reappears in the children's hospital and other sections in the game too. Wandering in a little bit further, we learn that the denizens of this area have been equally suffering like the buildings that are crumbling around them. Referred to by the game as building beds, these sentient masses of concrete and gravel and clay, and they look like they have skyscrapers for heads. They actually warn us that these moths are parasitic silkworms that are actually destroying their way of life. We also meet these dubious little creatures.
A dubious little creature
known as basilmen that confirm this tragedy and further comment on how future generations of building people are being harmed in the making. Now, when I say basil, I don't mean like the spice basil, although it's pretty tasty. I mean more basil in terms of, quote, forming or belonging to a bottom layer or base, according to Google. Now, it could be that they're called basilmen for they represent the structure or the backbone of building people society, or it could also refer to how, despite things crumbling around them, they're more focused on how to spread their pheromones for the reproduction of building new buildings, specifically through black mold. Because, how else are you going to make new buildings? Not with wood or lumber or anything like that. You're going to spread black mold. Well, either way, as we heed the Basil Man's words and we fight tooth and nail through the enemies that are trying to stop us, we learn from the building beds that in order to get rid of the silkworms and other parasitic moths, we actually have to gather the ingredients necessary to make a pesticide that can be shot outside of a cannon. From here, we kind of gather quite a gnarly concoction of sulfur, DDT, which I had to Google this, is actually an insecticide famous for its harm to both humans and wildlife, and bromine, in order to make one of the most toxic cocktails we could possibly make and shoot it out at these insects. As intended, once it's loaded in the cannon and fired, the moths quickly erupt into a crimson mist. The building beds then congratulate us for our hard work and say there's an egg waiting for us at the bottom of the city. One of them also makes a point to say that he for one hates eggs, they give him the heebie-jeebies. No, you give me the heebie-jeebies, looking like a giant building. Anyway, we make our way down to the lower levels of the city and we enter a grand sphincter and seek out our reward. Now you may be thinking that we helped out these building people out of the kindness of our hearts, and to be honest, that's what I was thinking too, but it seems like Venus has other plans. Once we're inside the Grand Sphincter, the building bed informs us that we are in the presence of the great Taproot, from which all living buildings are created. He also makes it a point to say, please be careful with what we're in the presence of. Now, despite the structure supporting the whole of building kind, my intrusive thoughts took over and my caveman brain swung my hammer at the structure as hard as I could and watched it explode into a million pieces. Despite single-handedly ending an entire civilization of building people while the guy that just warned us not to do that has his mouth dropped to the floor, we do get an egg of the earth, and we can make our way out of this lair as the world around us begins to collapse. Now, as funny as the irony is in this, that we went through all this effort to help these people only to actually be their greatest enemy, I can't help but think there's also some symbolic significance to what we just did. I thought it was pretty odd that the buildings found their way of life disrupted so heavily by silkworm moths, which usually don't, they don't do anything in buildings. They don't feed on the buildings. They usually just eat like white mulberries and that's it. Consulting our AI overlords like ChatGPT about the moth's possible significance, it raised the idea that these moths could represent maybe purity and beauty to which the concrete landscape of the building people's cityscape heavily juxtaposes. Similarly, it also talked about how these moths could maybe represent transformation and metamorphosis, which might draw connections between the moths hatching and the dragonfly queen. Interestingly, when consulting Wikipedia on who gave Bombyx mori, or these silkworm moths, their binomial name, Linnaeus' name comes up again, along with authoring the books that tied the biological sex symbols to different planets like Mars, Mercury, and Venus. Linnaeus is also known as the father of modern taxonomy, which describes how biological organisms are given their names and how they're classified into different groups. Now, thinking about it, pretty much like all animals and organisms are classified this way, but I was wondering if it could be a coincidence or maybe that Linnaeus' work relates to larger themes hidden within the game. In any case, it seems that these cookie-cutter-esque buildings run antithetical to what Venus is looking to do, and so we tear it all down, pilfer the egg of the Earth, and get out of here. After we complete this level, there's only one more for us to complete, and it's called Instructions, and the stage is represented by an oozing DNA helix as its image, and maybe it foreshadows how we're about to wreak some pretty heavy consequences on humankind. Once the level loads, we find ourselves in a long pale blue hallway where DNA helixes adorn the ground, and Venus expresses her confusion about what's going on as we continue to walk down this hallway. We descend further down in the level's main area, and the elevator doors open up, and we're brought with quite the sight. There's these giant colossal DNA strands that extend into the heavens, bright neon signs that point to DNA libraries and testing centers, and massive amounts of genetic codes slowly swirling around what we can assume is the central strand. Talking with the locals, we find someone called the Clay Allele who talks about we're at the epicenter where genetic instructions are made. Somewhat forebodingly, this Clay Allele also mentions how everything that has happened to us, everything we have ever done, has been decided in this location and will continue to be. Proceeding a bit further, we find a squirming mass of flesh writhing on the wall, and we learn that our job is kind of like a plumber and how we have to unclog the sentient teratoma from the pipes in order to get to the next stage. I had to actually Google what a teratoma was, and apparently it's a tumor that may contain bits of teeth, bone, hair, and or muscle, so kind of gross. So to begin to do so, we grab an empty syringe, and only naturally we inject it into the teratoma and extract some of its DNA. We then scour the DNA facility looking for something that'll give us access to the DNA injection machine, and we find these switches that, after we flip, it begins to unlock the safety locks that will allow us to take the next step in finding the correct sequence of nucleotides we need in order to complete a currently unknown strand. We eventually encounter someone called the Origin Point who relishes in the fact that they're responsible for how we and likely others suffer from whether it be blood clot disorders, malfunctioning brains, or other chronic health problems decided from birth. Similarly, we find another Origin Point who says that we should be grateful for the wonderfully flawed chromosomes that he provides in order to determine how we will decay. Why I oughta. It seems that the inhabitants are pretty content on our DNA being altered in some way in order to make us develop lifelong conditions or chronic health problems. Even with their sadism, we're able to slowly find and activate the consoles needed in order to release the injector's safety locks. Along the way, we encounter this quadrupedal enemy that honestly tanks quite a few shots before going down. We find out that this flesh golem was actually guarding the console necessary for us to deposit our DNA sample obtained from earlier. We get sort of like a post-it note that looks like that one episode from SpongeBob where that grocery list is dangling, and we learn of our nucleotide sequence necessary in order to create healthy DNA. From here we travel further into the epicenter where we find a DNA library that is literally quite that, filled with books, and according to the alleles helps them keep track of the diseases and things we've created in case they forget. How thoughtful of them. Within this library, we find the instructions we need to actually create a healthy strand of DNA. However, what the instructions also tell us not to do, wink wink, is to make sure that the nucleotides are paired in the correct order because the quote, the more mismatched they are, the more genetically unstable and corrupted the host body will become. I think I'm getting deja vu here. I have a feeling our main character might be going off horse in just a little bit. Our predictions were correct in that once we obtain this sequence, we go back to the teratoma and inject it with unstable DNA, which causes it to burst at the seams and explode, revealing the pathway to the central strand. The Clay Allele next to us seems pretty happy with the result and double checks with us to make sure the injection site was local. Local? Whoops. Walking further ahead, we get a closer glimpse of the vast DNA structure that pierces the heavens when suddenly disaster strikes because the once vibrant DNA world around us turns monochrome as the music stops and color in the environment slowly drains and the central DNA strand actually disintegrates along with its orbiting genetic information. The dude next to us is like, what have you done? Because we injected corrupt DNA into the primordial information and that there's no more DNA, no more instructions. That's crazy. Anyway, give me that. Yet again, we shatter a small ecosystem to the delight of Venus, suggesting that maybe these changes are welcome and in accordance with her overall plan. It's like, okay, I could see it with the buildings because, no one wants like a gray cityscape, but I can't help but wonder what is different about the DNA headquarters that made Venus want to shatter it. One hypothesis could be that the arrogance and some of the sadistic nature of the people we encountered in this area causing long-term health problems for others reflects a systemic change that Venus wants to make, and some of this evil intent along with the buildings spreading black mold and creating eyesores takes away from some of the beauty of the natural world and nature as a whole. The other part I can't stop thinking about is everything is clay. The people are clay, the alleles are clay, the buildings are clay, everything around us is made of clay and dust. Why is that? Specifically, the alleles being referred to as clay alleles may suggest that there are alternate versions of genes that presumably lead humans being made of clay as they've evolved. We can take a closer look at this idea by beginning to visit the ephemeral locations that periodically appear on the level select screen, much like the transient locations from earlier. Well, let's start with the Natural History Museum. That sounds pretty fun. In this museum, we get a glimpse in the idea of how Earth's surface dwellers have evolved over time. Starting with humans, the narrator in the museum begins to describe how different species have occupied Earth at different periods of time. Pretty accurately, the narrator clocks us as being hairy bipeds that use tools and are emotive and very fun. I think we're pretty fun too. What's more is the narrator goes on to explain how that humans have largely disappeared and the last humans died in captivity some unknown number of years ago. What? How does that make any sense? If we died out years ago, who's been living on the surface? Also, more sinisterly, if our main character isn't a human, then what is she? Interestingly, the model for these humans also bear a striking resemblance to the figure from earlier where the orbs were communicating with one another. Does this mean that there's still humans alive and in hiding, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Exploring the exhibit further, we actually stumble upon the Thrate display where the narrator describes and expresses a pretty intense hatred for the Thrates, who are described as evolving to take the place of humans after the humans became extinct. To emphasize that last point, the narrator really does not like the Thrates because the narrator describes them as accomplishing nothing of note and criticizing them as being very annoying on account of the Thrates' strong and stoic nature. Taking it one step further, the narrator celebrates their demise as become supposedly extinct and, quote, "we are better for it." Again, much like the humans, there's evidence to suggest that Thrates are still alive, though. We see them in the village, we see them in other areas of the game, and really it's begging the question of, much like humans, why are Thrates fleeing underground and what displaced them from the surface world? As we pan over to the next exhibit, I think we're going to find our answer. The museum's next installation is much darker than the others, and it's really far more abrupt, where the narrator delivers a single line. After the Thrates went extinct, the humans evolved, and what we see before us are these new quote-unquote humans that are these eerie, distorted figures that sway in an unlit exhibit. Taking a closer look, these things of course look nothing like humans, and they look entirely artificial. They're gray in color, they have appendages that bend in a really unnatural way, and large maws with dead-set eyes. All these qualities suggest that these new humans are fabricated in some way. It's worth noting that another ephemeral location actually dives into this a little bit further, where we go to the human seedbed. Once we arrive, there's not a whole lot going on in this location outside of finding more of these clay-like humans. What's bizarre is as Venus starts to poke at these creatures, that we get the impression that they're just starting to learn how to become human, with Venus noting how one human is just starting to learn word order and it's going to be a while before they're sent to the surface. In a way, these monsterly beings are kind of cute in the way that they just say little more than gibberish and learn how to be humans. Now this location is really the missing puzzle piece that we needed to make connections to earlier areas in the game. With these quote new humans being described as chalky and clay-like and their texture feeling like a glue-covered cinder block, the Thrate woman's description from earlier in the Thrate village makes a lot of sense when describing how after a human got hit by a car, all that came out was clay. Modern problems require modern solutions, and so Venus trades her hammer for a gun and decides to shoot these clay figures to see what happens. Now, instead of exploding into blood and guts like we might expect, they kind of just poof and crumble into a pile of dust and ash beneath our feet. Seeing this makes me think back to the alleles from earlier and strengthens the idea that they're creating more of these living statues. Putting these pieces together still doesn't explain who's doing this. Why are humans evolving this way? What led to the original humans getting captured, followed by the Thrates, and who or what is holding them captive? In an attempt to answer these questions, I thought back to the hard structure level and how humanity has seemed to change for the worse. One thing that keeps popping up in my head is the idea of growth and really how growth relates to plants. It seems like we're getting this weird dichotomy of how these concrete buildings are quote growing, and instead of making new humans organically, they're planting metaphorical seeds in this concrete seedbed to make more of them. And no doubt this weird turning of nature on its head feels really distasteful to our main character. Especially since a seedbed is defined as a controlled environment where seeds are grown before being transplanted elsewhere, it's definitely possible that this evolution of humans was premeditated. As we ponder this, we get an eerie reminder that we ourselves aren't exempt from being replaced as we walk back toward the entrance and find a clay rendition of Venus shaking wildly waiting for us. Upon closer inspection, the cooler Venus notes how this fake, quote-unquote, is perfecting imitation and has fingers looking for hammers. Here, if you want one so badly, this one's on the house. Now, as I stroke the hairs on my chin like a modern-day Aristotle, trying to piece all this together, we can proceed into the last level. Referred to as symbols, we enter the level and we're met with a familiar sight where we find ourselves back in the children's hospital. How bizarre, and even more bizarre is once we start walking further, the walls give way around us and reveal the magnitude of the giant area we now find ourselves in. There are several buildings suspended midair with narrow walkways with a domed building straight across from us to the backdrop of a sickly green sky. Walking in a bit further, we find another symbol person who right out the gate doesn't hesitate to let us know that they don't trust us. In addition to doubting our character, they also let us know that these doors behind them will only unlock once we understand, quote, this world and what makes it. As we speak with this symbol person, it becomes apparent that they're ancient and beyond human understanding, indicated by Venus describing how it dances as if it's older than writing and that it is thinner than a single atom. Well, no matter how old it is, we have to go find this understanding it was talking about, so we fight our way through enemies and obstacles that prove a far greater challenge in some of the other areas. We have to go toe-to-toe with these either lanky red and blue monsters that resemble veins and arteries, or these electrostatic death fields that pop out of nowhere, or gigantic guillotines that are trying to separate our head from our shoulders, or even armored automatons that easily fill hallways with fire, or these short stubby flesh golems with psychic abilities. Around every corner there's something trying to get at us. Miraculously, we survive and we learn what these enemies are guarding. In each of the 4 corners of the map, we find these massive deities who loom over us, and we learn that these beings are paragons, gods who represent concepts that make up the universe and knowledge of the world. Of these paragons, we got Paragon of the People, we got Paragon of Flesh, Paragon of Concepts, and the Paragon of Symbols, all of which go into great detail describing how the world's been shaped by their power. Now at this point, I'll let you, the viewer, take a guess at how our main character will begin to learn from these eternal creators. Is she A, going to the library, B, talking over tea, C, hammer, or D, shadowing them at work? Well, if you guess C, you're right. Because we wield Mjolnir and crash it down on these omnipotent beings and extract their Paragon key. While not an actual key, it's rather an important point of life that will allow us to unlock the doors from earlier. As we stumble around this area from Paragon to Paragon, we actually walk into what appears to be a grotesque-looking art exhibit. Once inside, there's this grand hall where we find a bust of a woman's figure and several rudimentary sculptures of these quadrupedal creatures. Embedded in the sculptures are these large, crude pieces of metal what we can assume to be nails, given Venus's weapon of choice and some other context clues provided later in the game. We can find another symbol person who describes this as being one of the deep, darkest part of Venus's mind that she tries to repress. Much to our horror and to the delight of this symbol person, they go on to describe how the deep part behind her pituitary gland has been commodified and put into this gallery to be put on display to curious onlookers of the public. Gee, buddy, thanks. Nice to meet you too. Curiously, the motif of brain structures repeat as we look on one of the large walls in the gallery and find a human brain where at its center it seems to be a similar shape and color palette to that of the eggs of the earth. It's good to know Venus always has money on the mind. Well, moving past speculation, we take our newly acquired keys and return to the entrance where we can unlock the door that contains the last egg of the earth that we need to get to the ending of the game. Once back in the level select screen, we can click on entrance and the camera pans inward to the eye's pupil and all of a sudden large red text appears on our screen saying, "I'm falling." Not only are we traversing the normal geological layers of the earth, but we're descending through parts referred to as veins and sinew, almost suggesting that the earth is alive as we're falling through it. Shortly after this sequence, we find ourselves 20,000 leagues under the sea in one of the Earth's deepest chasms, the Mariana Trench. It's a little more odd looking than I would think as we find these, quote, girl structures that resemble anime characters, and there's a bunch of moss and seaweed in our faces as we're stumbling forward. Eventually in the distance, we catch a glimpse of a bright white fractal inviting us forward. Now this part actually deviates from the normal ending sequence as we stumble into a moss-covered labyrinth adorned with dragonfly imagery and containing what appears to be a giant bug-like corpse in the distance. This thing is huge, and upon closer inspection, following our conversation with a nearby Thray woman, it appears that this is the Dragonfly Queen's, quote, sacred dermis. I am but too familiar with this sacred dermis myself as I shed my exoskeleton every morning per my daily ritual. Unlike my morning routine, the Thray woman goes on to describe how we're in the presence of a holy site, as its significance is marked by being the starting point for the Dragonfly Queen's great metamorphosis. Venturing a bit further, we find a bright yellow light protruding out of the end of a hallway and we begin to walk toward it. Finally, the center of the earth. Looks a bit different than I imagined. Instead of being filled with dirt or lava or something, it's actually a vast dome with a heavenly glow and an ancient language lost to time swirls above us in chains of gold. At the heart of this rotunda are the eggs of the earth we found earlier, orbiting this large pyramid-like structure with a red sphere in the middle of it. Upon closer inspection, it actually looks like a planet, and given our main character's connection with astral forces, we might assume that this might be Venus. We place our hands on the sphere, and from this point on, it's pretty similar to the ending we saw earlier, where we take this life meat of the world and make life anew as we thank our helmet for its contribution and sprout dragonfly wings before ascending into the heavens. We're then presented the title of the game and words of support from the developer thanking us for playing his game. Now normally the old Psychopomp would have ended there, but this is Psychopomp Gold. There's much more beneath the surface that it's our job to uncover and make sense of the game's remaining mysteries. And actually in a pretty timely fashion, we can start with a song that starts playing as we finish the game.
News and they seasons and told me I should cut you to pieces and told me that you were not true and told me they would redistribute you. Rolled your eyes to a goodwill. They drank you till they had their fill and they sold your teeth at a flea market. Showed your skin at a Target and made the earth from your bones and they put your brains into phones and they turned you into quite a profit and hid the rest in my closet.
Now I'm gonna keep it real with you. I have no idea what this song is talking about. But that doesn't mean we can't speculate. As I listen to the song lyrics, it seems like one motif that comes up over and over is how public institutions ran by the government, such as schools, hospitals, and sewer systems, seem to commodify its citizens and exploit the people it represents for profit. This theory is given support by how Venus talks in these levels, where she describes how, like the hospitals, for example, sell patients false promises and continue to make money off of them as they continue to get more sick. Alternatively, we could also interpret the song more literally within the context of the game, where the singer could be describing how the Dragonfly Queen had its parts scattered throughout the earth and it's up to Venus to find them in order to ascend her throne. Either way, it looks like there's still some unanswered questions that we can begin to shed light on by exploring the game's remaining locations. Like the other two layers, the third layer contains these aberrant locations that spawn periodically and expand on the game's lore in a disturbing way. Beginning with the first simply called Spiral, we walk down a dimly lit hallway before reaching the end where we find something interesting. 4 hands twisting back and forth making the same gesture, 4 smiling faces, and a hollow blue figure with branches that look like nerves or veins extending from its head. As we make our way down, we passed phrases that said hand of a father, hand of a mother, heart of a child, and mind of a demon adorning the tops of the doorways. Now we can interpret this literally just representing a family, but what about the demon? And the hand signs in the background seem to be making the demon symbol that signify the demon's influence over what appears to be the inner workings of someone's mind. Either that or just telling us to rock on. In just a bit, we'll come back to this piece of art, but in the meantime, let's relax and immerse ourselves in nature. Ah, the peaceful quiet of nature. Nature is a lot different than expected because all around us is the deafening shrieks of birds who retch and jerk violently, letting us know that they're on high alert for some threat. There's also a colossal stone face that looks identical to how the Dragonfly Queen is represented throughout the game and her places of worship and other religious imagery we can find. At the end of the walkway, we can encounter what we can presume to be the embodiment of the Dragonfly Queen, where we find this dragonfly-shaped face superimposed on what looks to be a female human head with long, tangled ponytails. Venus speaks to her familiarity with this motif, saying that this symbol calls us something inside of her that she's felt before she was even born. This avatar of nature talks about animalistic instincts in singular words such as eat, run, and one I can't show here, but it seems from this encounter that Venus is beginning to step into her role as the Dragonfly Queen and work toward a common goal with the avatar in nature. Perhaps this shared task includes reshaping the world, returning it to a more simplistic, natural state. Well, time to take our leave. See ya, buddy. Of the 2 remaining locations, we start first with the special shower, which, I guess it's a shower. It's a vast tile-covered hallway surrounded by corroding pipes and an open ceiling that, instead of showers, is lush foliage and trees. At the end of the area, we can find, holy schmoly, what is that? In a bathtub at the end of the hall, we can find this emaciated, mutilated person with teal hair wearing a large black crown and making these disturbing guttural noises as it gestures at us. Yeah, I don't know about this one. I'm out. My best guess is that maybe they're punished in some way since they don't have any hands and they seem to shake their head back and forth as if begging for mercy. Maybe they're just too smelly and they were confined to the shower realm for all of eternity. Well, I think there may be some connection to content later in the game. For now, we regretfully have to leave this person behind. This leaves the last aberrant location, Ancient Future location, which sounds kind of like an oxymoron. There really isn't a whole lot to see here outside of an empty platform with these giant slabs of rock floating in the distance, and of the largest of these slabs is a depiction of Venus as indicated by her headgear. However, there's someone next to her. Who is that? It's difficult to say given the simple drawing, but what stands out is that both figures have angel wings sprouting from their head, possibly indicating their status as godlike symbols or reaching some form of enlightenment. Similarly, there's a lock symbol on the figure to the right, maybe suggesting that this person has yet to be fully realized. As we leave this area, it's an understatement to say that there's some questions still lingering, but fortunately we can look to clarify some things in one of the game's final areas, the Epilogue. After obtaining the first ending of the game, if we go back to the level select screen, now we can choose Exit, which appears in our menu with a sky blue eye with a teal X in its pupil looking upward at us. Clicking on the eye, we're presented with a small cutout of Venus, assuming her dragonfly form, before it starts violently shaking and then skyrockets upward as it smashes our screen. Green hexagons bubble outward as capital letters and bold spell out connection to subject lost, tracking alternative subject found, time to wake up. Alternative subject, who could that be? We're not even given a smidgen of time to ponder this as a doorway opens in the darkness and coaxes us outward with the light that pours in. On the other side of this angelic light is a motel. Although we're quite literally in the middle of nowhere, right away we can notice some stark differences. Specifically, our UI has been replaced with brass tubes that twist and turn and coil around one another and circle a new protagonist who looks a lot different than Venus does. Our new playable character has masculine features with short dark hair and looks to be wearing a suit and wearing a mask that splits down the middle with a series of squares and rectangles on the left and a pretty intense looking eye on the right that contains numerous smaller circles. Making our way down the motel steps, we see what looks to be Earth in the distance, as well as the King of Dogs who lets us know that something terrible is awoken on Earth and begins to plead with us to put an end to its imminent destruction as only we have the power to do so. We follow the King of Dogs by being brought to a new world map with only one level to choose from, Meeting Place. During the loading screen, we get a glimpse into our new character's personality, who seems to be much more focused on efficiency and perfectionism, unlike Venus, who kind of just cared about having fun and causing chaos. Saying things like, we don't have time for mistakes and you'll never get ahead in life if you doubt yourself for even a moment, it makes me wonder about who is this new person we're introduced to? Is this Krusnir Colvin, the person referenced in a note found in the hospital level as being the King of Mercury? What's odd is that this note refers to Venus and Mercury as being, quote, two fictitious planets. Could it be that in the timeline of Psychopomp, these planets never existed, or were they erased? And if so, by who or what? As we mull over these questions, we return back to the epilogue and rendezvous with the King of Dogs, who kind of just gives us a fetch quest to find his associates who are late to the meeting. Assuming this really is Mercury, we travel further inward and encounter enemies that resemble concrete buildings with legs and dispatch them using a nail instead of Venus's typical weapon of choice. I wonder what the significance could be behind Mercury and Venus's weapons complementing one another. Could it be that when together they can use the hammer and nail to build the universe or create new things in a way that no one else can? On our quest, we encounter new allies called Everins, and although they vary in size, they have bug-like appendages and horns protruding out of their carapace with 4 eyes set on top of one another as they glare at our main character menacingly. What stands out about their names is that according to Wikipedia, Everin is a Turkish word and it means universe or cosmos, hinting at the idea that maybe these creatures have a connection to the stars above or have historically filled a role of celestial importance. Space gods or not, apparently they also don't like being touched. Slowly but surely, we begin to encounter the King of all Dogs associates, beginning with Mother, who has a nondescript appearance with a simple cloak worn over her head. She looks human enough and comments on her various love for snakes before letting us know that she'll be in touch. Father, on the other hand, is a little more groovy and is surrounded by large purple flowers and wears clothing that looked like it may have been popular in the 1960s. He talks of flowers being both beautiful and, quote, a deadly poison before confirming his attendance at the meeting.
Oh, behave.
Taking a closer look, Father resembles the rightmost figure depicted in stone in the ancient future location. Could the figure on the left have been Mother instead of Venus? Either way, that just leaves our final ally, Child, who Mercury talks about there being more folds in her eyes than there should be, possibly alluding to the fact that she's maybe more ancient than we can perceive. Her special interest, unlike snakes and flowers, is puppets and seems to cleverly suggest that we are a puppet to some larger scheme. Once reunited, our meeting can begin where we find ourselves in our bright pink sky and we walk further into a wide arena with a raised platform in the middle with the King of Dogs and his associates. Suddenly, the ground beneath us begins to shake and the sky parts and its hue is replaced by a rich blue and Earth becomes visible in the distance. Now hold up, is that really Earth? Although faint, we can make out a single ring around what was originally thought to be Earth, but maybe it's something else. Without warning, several rings of holy light appear above Earth's orbit and a bright white light erupts from the planet as the one we're on continues to shake violently. Mercury's vision fades to static as we're brought to the menu screen of Psychopomp 2? Let's go! I used to pray for days like these. Our excitement is short-lived as this teaser is for a game that might be coming in the future, not quite yet, but we unlock third-person mode and we complete the epilogue. Wow, what a journey so far. All that's left is to visit these 2 tabs at the bottom corners of our screen that, up until this point, we've largely kept neglected. Let's start with Home, where after we boot up this level, we see a much different sight than we're used to. We see Venus, who's now pixelated, and we can control her movements from a side-scrolling point of view. Nice place you got here. At the end of this room and others that follow, there's a familiar symbol from the symbols level that bars our entrance into the next room. To unlock these symbols, we actually have to go back to the levels throughout the game and find these hidden emerald keys, giant fluorescent keys with a green jewel and that same symbol that will allow us to progress further. Slowly but surely, we collect these keys and dive deeper into the home area where we meet some interesting characters along the way, and some have clearly seen better days. Progressing through the different areas, we can make interpretations that these different beings somehow represent the different parts of Venus's psyche. For example, we meet a character who calls herself Libido, other characters who lament things we've done or how we look, and upon unlocking the final door, we encounter what appears to be this gargantuan brain that pulsates mechanically as pipes extend outward from its cerebrum. Now, even with all these crazy parts, nothing could have prepared me for what happens next. Despite my increasing sense of dread continuing to layer on top of itself as we unlock more and more doors, the final door is the complete opposite. We enter a room that's completely peaceful with a nature scene that has these beautifully tall green trees, cobblestone architecture, and a fountain with a lion's face on it. All the while, this nature scene is to the backdrop of a radiant blood red moon in the distance. Even more interesting and disorienting from what we just got through to get to this point, we come across what appears to be afterimages of two children with the same fractal symbol from the entrance at the center of the earth adoring their faces. Based on their appearances and the architecture surrounding us, we might suspect that these children represent the yin and yang. According to Wikipedia, the yin and yang are represented as cycles that are opposite but interconnected and self-perpetuating. Although complementary, at the same time they oppose one another to form a dynamic system of which the whole is greater than the assembled parts. We can apply this concept to the interactions between these two children, as approaching them causes our screen to dip to white, and we're shown the dialogue between these two children who are kind of teasing each other because one stole the other's nail and mocks them for it, and then the other one desperately wants it back. At a stalemate, the two decide to compromise by sharing their names with one another, and we learn that these two children are Venus and Mercury. Setting aside their differences, Venus gives Mercury back his nail and laughs, thinking that they could be friends. She continues to offer to share with Mercury her secret for catching her favorite bug, which is dragonflies, where Mercury says, I'm not really that interested, I think beetles are more my favorite. These playground squabbles continue until the game brings us to a depiction of the solar system where only Mercury and Venus are not crossed off, potentially indicating that the other planets don't exist or haven't been created yet. We get an achievement that says remember the distant past, and taking a look at the one for the emerald keys that's labeled Key of the Mind, it seems that somehow these interactions represent Venus's memories, maybe before even the solar system was created. Moreover, the yin and yang imagery of Mercury and Venus maybe suggests that they need to come together sometime in the future in order to maintain cohesion. Although now it seems like they're at odds with each other with how Psychopomp Gold is ending, but we'll cross that road when we get there. This certainly seems to be the case as we gain access to the forbidden location level in the level select screen that takes us to a library which you might expect contains a lot of books. And by a lot of books, I mean a lot of books. And among these books, there's a note that observes the interstellar phenomenon of the Kalman 4, which there's these 4 brilliant lights in the sky that leave behind them a trail of absolute darkness. These lights have been observed by scientists seem to sap the light from other stars, making them appear to have disappeared completely. I wonder if I've seen 4 celestial beings before. These same beings seem to not appreciate us sticking our nose where it doesn't belong, as the room becomes ominously dark as 4 crimson eyes glare at us with murderous intent and track our movements as we make our way out of the library. If we're to believe that the Kalman 4 represent mother, father, child, and the king of all dogs, it raises the question of what their importance has been in the game's universe so far and how they might be an antagonist to what Mercury and Venus have to come together to stop. Undeniably, they're all powerful and can monitor us at any time, which is represented by the eye motif that appears throughout the game, where either reflections of the moon, the level select screen, and even a level that can only be accessed using a debug menu that shows that they're watching us at all times. Can our heroes defeat these villains? Who knows? What we do know can be clarified by something we can find in the children's hospital level, where by the outdoor garden area we can stand by a wall and begin to hear what sounds like a series of words and letters that seem to formulate some code.
1, 7, 8.
Which is pretty odd because up until this point there haven't been a lot of ARG elements in the game where we might put this code either somewhere in the game or outside of it. Thankfully the fans of this game are brilliant, and per the helpful feedback left on the Steam community forum, we learned that we're supposed to put this code into a web page on the Fading Club website. We were then provided a picture depicting the small celestial family in a poem titled Fun. It reads, "Fun's most fun when it's with you, from sky to shining star, together forever it's true. To travel near and far, if we break too many toys, and if that makes you blue, we'll reunite the king and queen and make the worlds anew. Fun will be eternal then, we'll play forevermore, the toys will now have lives again, the better for us four." By the poem's description, it seems that the mother, father, child, and king of all dogs travel across space to have fun with its toys, including stars, planets, sentient life, and other aspects of the cosmos. When they break, they just say, oh well, and they feel confident that they can reunite the king and the queen, presumably Mercury and Venus, to recreate the universe so they continue to have fun with it. Seeing that these deities seem to, on the totem pole put having fun over the sanctity of life, we might be worried that the king of all dogs is asking for Mercury's help, suggesting that it might be disingenuous and that he's likely to betray us in the future. In the same vein, some of the numbers that we can dial into the phone area of the game really illustrate this idea that the king of all dogs is plotting against the best interests of Mercury and Venus. There's a lot of codes that can be found on the game Steam community page that we won't be able to get to today, but typing in the numbers that would spell out bugs on the keypad plays the following message.
I can't stand them. I can't stand the way they crunch, the way they smell, the sounds they make, and these damn worlds they create. But don't worry. We won't be dealing with bugs for very long.
From the speaker's message, we can see there's someone out there who detests the presence of animist spirit of beings like bugs and the king and queen who represent them. Whether this voice belongs to one of the 4 deities or one of their associates is unclear, but one thing is certain. Venus and Mercury are in danger as their critics are trying to pit them against one another as opposed to them working in harmony like they have in the past. But for now, we can only wait and see if a 3rd game ends up being released. As we tie up loose ends, I was giving thought to the overall message in the story. I mean, after all, we haven't really talked much about what is a psychopomp and how it relates to Venus's role in the story or the larger plot as a whole. As Wikipedia suggests that psychopomps typically bring newly deceased souls from Earth to the afterlife, one interpretation that can be with the world of psychopomp decaying and humans and buildings alike being mass-produced out of clay and concrete respectively. It's likely that Venus seeks to restore the world to its more natural blueprint and guide these lost souls back to the way things should be, as opposed to the interests of mother, father, child, and king of all dogs who seek a more artificial world that they can break apart and put back together at their convenience. With Venus as the queen of dragonflies and Mercury as the king of beetles, it might be between the two of them their hope is to restore order to the natural world. Although it still seems like we're missing some pieces, what's clear is that the game's depth is unparalleled nonetheless and provides an amazing experience that I thank you for watching and I encourage you to try for yourself. This game's creepiness and symbolism and depth, I think, stands out amongst other indie games in the space right now and definitely deserves a lot of attention. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing and share your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear everyone else's opinions on how the different elements are connected together in the game or how the story could develop in a future game like Psychopomp 2. I also encourage you to check out my Patreon and YouTube membership that can help continue to support me making videos like these if you enjoyed it. Doing so will let you join the Council of Thumbs, of which I'll include the current members at the end of this video. Similarly, be sure to also follow and support Fading Club so that the developer can continue to make awesome content of our favorite silly king and queen. Well, that's all I got for now. Thank you immensely for watching this video and continuing to support me making videos like these, and I hope to see you in the next one. This is Droll Gaming, signing off.